very exciting.
It's fun,
Yeah, right.
super fun.
Like I'm on
Um,
TV.
Yeah, it's so funny because, having some history around the TV and media thing, how much we do and how exciting it is. Let me copy. Oh, cool. The first time we did one of these, for whatever reason, the link wasn't working. It was just a disaster. So um, now we double check, but it's
Always
working,
good. Yeah.
which is good. All right. So Tim, why don't we get started just a little bit? And Tim DeBellis, agent extraordinaire, Santa Rosa, W Real Estate, part of the who's who and luxury real estate crew. Just an absolute all-star. Love so much of what he's doing. So much of what he's doing, just redefining, truly redefining. I know that the luxury space and the way that that's approached. And I'm super excited to have Tim on today to talk about some of those different things. Tim, as we kind of get started, why don't you just give us a minute or 90-second kind of view on what's going on in the Santa Rosa marketplace and what are what are you seeing and what are some of the things that are affecting you, in your space there in the wine country of California.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me on today. Really appreciate it. So I think here in wine country, we are experiencing pretty much what we have seen across the country in terms of the market, the slowdown over the past year and a half. But what's really encouraging is that we are now seeing a dramatic upturn in activity. So we have sort of, I feel, settled back into the traditional real estate sales cycle. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of activity picking up over the last several weeks. One of the things that's always going to be a factor in our area is just this constrained inventory situation. I know that we talk about that on a broad level across the US, but here in our market, it's very, very acute because we're not a huge market and there's not a ton of large building that occurs. So we do always find ourselves in a very constrained inventory situation, which always puts upward pressure on pricing. So even though, we've seen a slowdown, prices have continued to remain very, very strong. And with the interest rates fairly steady, we're starting to see buyers really just accept the fact that this is the new reality and are coming back into the market.
Awesome. Awesome. Sarah is a legend in the Park City area, has been there for, I'm not going to say forever. It just seems like forever. But also in talking about kind of a small market that's a constrained market, when you are in Park City, you're surrounded by mountains. And so geographically, you're constrained because there's not many places that you can go with that. Part of the Christie's real estate family and super happy to have you on today as well. So, Sarah, what are you, in 90 seconds thereabouts, what are you seeing kind of in your market in Park City? And, what are some of the changes that you're seeing and recognizing on a regular basis at this point in time?
Thanks so much for having me on today, Chris. This is exciting and a true pleasure. It's spring in the mountains right now. We're pretty excited. We've got 5 days left of ski season. This is a really hot market. I've been here since 1998, so before the Olympics, and this town has really changed. It's really become a region, to be honest. So We call ourselves the Wasatch Back. The Wasatch Front is Salt Lake, and tremendous news coming out of Salt Lake right now as far as growth and economic prosperity. All the news is pretty significant coming out of this region. So what we've got going on here is a really tight market in and around the resort areas. You've got prices just climbing. Like, we are on par with Aspen at this point. It's been exciting and interesting to witness. But as you move a little bit beyond kind of the Park City, Deer Valley core, there's a tremendous amount of growth. It's actually a different county. It's called Wasatch County. They're very pro-growth. There's actually a private airport over there, and Tiger Woods has attached his name to his first high elevation golf course in the region. Plus, we've got a new ski resort coming, which Deer Valley, over a 3-4 year period, just put together a partnership agreement. It's called East Village at Deer Valley. So it's an exciting time to be here. We do have tight inventory. We've got a lot of demand. So it's an interesting time, really kind of understanding what the offerings look like in this region and just connecting people with those specific opportunities.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Both of you are in these destination type of markets, right? The wine country and the ski country, both of which, a lot of people spend their entire lives just dying to just go live in and get to experience, which is fantastic. So, tell me a little bit about your initial approach when you're presenting yourself and your services to new clients, new buyers. How do you tailor the approach to enhance the client experience? Talk to me about kind of your philosophical way of how you approach and talk to people when you first meet them, especially, you get to know them, build the rapport, and then, justify value.
I'll go ahead and jump in, if that's okay, Tim. So
Yeah.
I think an interesting connection for all of us here today is the word luxury, by the way. I just want to put that out there. So to kind of frame, what it is we're describing, I have been in the real estate business a long time. I started in commercial real estate, so I was an analyst first. And I live in a small town, even though it is a region, it really is a small town. So I learned early on, honestly, that anybody I interact with is a potential client. So for me, I'm always selling, and I hate to say that. I mean, I have a true love of what I do. Otherwise I don't think it would shine through if we didn't really, believe in what we're doing here. So for me, I'm always putting my best foot forward, honestly, and I'm doing my homework big time before I walk into a meeting. And there's so many scenarios. There's infinite scenarios, Chris, that we all come into contact with. It's hard to come up with sort of one specific method. But what I do is I prepare, quite frankly, and then I have my own tools. I finally learned after 27 years in the business or whatever, to take a moment to really get centered and get into my zone and figure out, who am I talking to? Why am I meeting with them? How can I connect? What is one way we can begin to establish trust, which is something that will weave throughout my, contribution on today's call, is figuring out early on how to establish trust.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Tim, I know, Tim, your background, you come from the consulting world, so you bring kind of a different approach to the sales experience and the client experience. Talk to me about a little bit about your initial approach when you're working with somebody new. And I would love for you to take a little opportunity to kind of carve out and talk a little bit about what you do with your doctors that are, looking to relocate into your area as well.
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, my background is in consulting prior to transitioning into real estate almost 8 years now. This summer will be 8 years that I've been with W Real Estate. I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers in their healthcare practice for nearly 20 years. So I really had the opportunity to hone the skills of, working with clients, sort of establishing that rapport and that trust that you mentioned, Sarah, through a process prior to actually ever doing any engagement with them. And so when I transitioned into this industry, I found that there are tremendous similarities and parallels to what I did in the consulting industry, because quite honestly, in my opinion, what we're doing is delivering client service. So for me, it really wasn't a huge shift and it wasn't a huge transition. That's not to say that there wasn't a pretty steep learning curve coming into this industry for sure. But what I quickly realized was just by observing and seeing how, the common practice was, especially when you're talking with buyers, it's this notion of, getting somebody and, asking some very basic questions, bedrooms, bathrooms, size, backyard, needs, so on and so forth, very high level stuff. Running around, showing a bunch of properties, even at the luxury level, and then finding one that they want to put an offer on, write up a purchase offer, send it through DocuSign, and boom, you're good to go. And I found that to be very, very disserving to the clients because there's so much information that a buyer needs to understand in advance of them, frankly, even going out and looking at properties. And I have found that at any tier of the market, this sort of upfront knowledge transfer and information sharing is so critical, regardless if somebody has purchased or sold homes, throughout their life, because they just don't do it every day like we do. So I really started looking around and saying, there's a better way to do this. So I just sort of, Sarah, to your point, I sort of stepped back for a moment and said, how do I want to craft my business? How do I want to create an experience at the front end of this process whereby I'm establishing trust and value from conversation number one? So what I ended up doing, and again, I don't think there's anything sort of revolutionary or groundbreaking here, but it is something different that differentiates me. So I ended up putting together what I refer to as an information package. And, I'm sure purchase contracts across the country are as complex as they are here in California. And so as you start reading through these documents, which, by the way, I find most agents really don't even understand the purchase agreement, which is a little bit scary. But the purchase agreement really kind of gives you a roadmap and it tells you what buyers need to understand in advance of them actually even considering submitting an offer. So I just assembled this, what I feel is a very informative package. And so I then said, okay, I'm not going to sort of jump at every moment that, the phone rings. I watched other colleagues who were purchasing leads through various online sources, and the phone would ring and they would scramble and they'd ask a bunch of questions, and they'd be out the door showing a property to somebody that they've never even met before. And I said, well, that's not me. I'm not the Uber driver of real estate. So I'm going to take the approach of really building a relationship with these people before I actually even engage with them. So I have developed a process whereby I have an initial meeting. Again, I'm sure most people do that. And I really sit down and have just a one-on-one sort of discovery conversation, because not only do I want to hear about what their goals are, what their aspirations are, what their needs are, but I really want the opportunity to find out, is this somebody I really want to engage with? Do I really want to be working with this person? And quite honestly, it's an opportunity for me to be able to begin that trust building, value delivery sort of conversation. So I take them through a discovery meeting. I generally like to do it in person. At that meeting, I present them with this information package. And I tell them what it's all about, why I'm presenting it to them. And then I say, here, I'd like you to take this, and then we can circle back in a week after you've had time to review it, so that if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, we can discuss those at that time. By the way, in that package, I always include a buyer representation agreement. And I just gave a training to one of our offices yesterday, and I said, for me, when I'm presenting that particular document to a prospective buyer, I don't really refer to it as a buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, which is the actual title. I say, this is an engagement agreement. This is an agreement whereby you are engaging me to provide service to you. So I think it kind of more aptly describes what that's all about. But we go through that process, and I've never found a situation where somebody has been reluctant to actually sign an engagement agreement. So it's in my opinion, it's really I think you mentioned this at the beginning, Chris. Um, you know, I think a lot of the challenges that we're seeing right now, or the proposed changes that we're anticipating coming to our industry, in many cases, is really driven by the fact that for the longest time, the practice has been not to really sort of just take the time to sit down to have a conversation, a very candid, open conversation, to make sure people understand what they're getting themselves into at the front end. So
Yeah,
that's my process and how I do that.
thank you for sharing that. It's interesting because both of you came from professional white collar backgrounds, and so coming into a luxury experience where there's an elevated experience just because the clientele demands it. Both of you are speaking in a different way, and things I'm picking up from both of you is even the language matters. Calling something, instead of calling it the title of the form, we call it an engagement agreement, because the way that we speak communicates so much more, than just using any kind of language. Language matters, especially when it comes to the luxury side. What are some of the key elements in your buyer presentations, and why do you think some of those components are so effective in what you're doing?
I'll just continue on, and then I can let Sarah jump in. So why I think it's effective, and I've sort of asked people after the fact, that after we've gone through everything, why I think this approach is so effective is because it does give me an opportunity to really begin to tell these people and demonstrate to prospective clients that, hey, this guy's doing something a little bit different, something that we didn't expect. The package itself that I put together, again, a lot of it are just the standard forms and advisories and disclosures that they're going to be required to sign regardless. So, but it's taking the time to go through those with them. I also include some other things in there too, like our state association puts out these quick guides that describe things like liquidated damages and arbitration versus mediation and so on and so forth, which again are very, very important clauses in these purchase agreements that nobody ever talks about. They just send it through e-signature, and you're supposed to just click away. I'm not an attorney. I don't provide legal guidance or services, but I do provide them the information that they need to be aware of in terms of what those specific things are. And I do some other things like, in a transaction, there are costs that, a buyer or seller have to incur. I get from my escrow company a chart that shows, customarily in our area, who pays for what fees. Because I even like to have if you're getting into a purchase, here's the things that you're going to have to understand and think about. So I try to do as much upfront in preparing them and informing them as much upfront as I can, so that when we get to the point of actually going to look at properties, I'm not having to educate them on, all the complexities of getting into a purchase.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Sarah? What are some of the components that you have woven into your presentations and your conversations with clients that you have found to be particularly effective?
Thank you. I was just jotting down some notes. I think the key is hopefully each of us in our own market areas are the true experts or among the experts. I mean, that's what we're all striving for, right? I mean, I've been at this a long time, and I continue to chip away, if you will, at cultivating a reputation for myself in this community. So beyond just the real estate business, I mean, and that's up to each of us to create whatever that looks like in our community, to really develop your sphere of influence. But For me, I mean, most of my clients, I will be honest, they do come to me. I get a lot of referrals. And I thank my lucky stars every day for that but it's hard work. I mean, that's 20 years in the business, a lot of lessons learned. I mean, I have had successes and failures. But I think for me, the key is that when these clients do come to us, hopefully these are referrals. And when a referral comes to you, that's already a big endorsement. These are very sophisticated clients that I'm working with. They are titans of industry, and they have a need when they come here. They can do all of their homework themselves, and quite frankly, they don't really need a realtor, if you will. They could easily facilitate a transaction themselves with an attorney or whatever it may be themselves. The bottom line is I'm providing something for them that they cannot get out of a magazine or from an attorney. This is local expertise. I mean, the professional expertise should be a given. And we were speaking before the live stream started this morning about our profession and what this means. And for us now to really start putting ourselves out there, as far as what we bring to the table from a professional standpoint, that should be a given. But beyond that is the local expertise. We call ourselves concierge realtors. I mean, we work with people before, during, and after. It's not just about the real estate transaction. We're here as a friend, a guide, a resource, all of the things. So that's what we talk about when we get in the car. And I really like your packet idea, Tim. I might want to employ that. I think putting together all of the key documents is a beautiful resource, but absolutely getting the buyer broker, or I prefer your phrase, in there and getting that out there in the initial conversations. There's nothing to be afraid of with that, because we are creating trust. This is cultivating a rapport and a relationship, and I look forward to these conversations. Every single time I do.
I find that it's actually, I talk to a lot of my colleagues here within our brokerage and even in our broader community here. And I've been doing a fair amount of travel over the past several months. And I take the opportunity, as any good agent should, right, to, see what others are doing in other markets across the country. And I have had the opportunity of talking with other realtors and asking this question and saying, hey, with all of the potential upheaval that is, maybe upheaval is not the right word, but potential change that is coming in our market or in our industry, what are you guys seeing? And by the way, have you guys used engagement agreements before? And almost unanimously, it's like, no, I've never used those. I'm really concerned about, how I'm going to have these conversations. And Sarah, you just nailed it. I mean, it's just, believe it or not, I find that it's a very easy conversation to have if you have a method and a process of leading them down this conversation pathway, so that by the time you get to the end and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to be providing services and I don't work for free. I expect to be paid for my services. And here's what I charge for my services. Oh, okay, totally fine. No problem. I'll sign. So I as I'm giving training to our agents, that's really the message I really try to convey. I said, it does come down to this fundamental understanding that you have to be able to understand what your value proposition is. You have to be able to communicate the value that you're going to be delivering. Once you can do that, and you can do it confidently and authentically, nobody is going to, for the most part, I would find anybody who, resists signing an agreement that you're going to be paid for the services that you're going to deliver, those aren't going to be the clients I want to work with anyway. So
I was just going to say that is so true, and it happens rarely. And honestly, we should have been having these conversations our entire, professional career. This isn't new.
Absolutely.
It does put us on the line, and bring it on, like you said earlier. And interesting conversations.
It's so funny as I talk to agents everywhere, right? When you get outside of the bounds of the North America kind of confines, in Europe, they're just horrified that you would have a conversation about on a listing side, buyer side, anything that would be have an exclusive representation on a house, right? We wouldn't even, in North America, we wouldn't even think of spending the time and effort on something, marketing money on a house that we don't have some kind of exclusive right to sell. And then we look at Washington State, which legislated the use of buyer broker agreements a few years ago, so they have to be used by law. And that market just got used to it. They've been like, well, we've been doing listing appointments for forever. We get listing contracts for forever. I'm just going to change that language and now orient it to buyers. And culturally, the buyers figure out pretty quickly that they're going to need some kind of they're going to need to be in an agreement if they want to have the representation. Then it becomes something that goes down to something both of you have talked about, which is this idea of trust and loyalty, building that trust with somebody and then taking it a step further and going into loyalty. And I think, one of the things that's been a big issue for me for a lot of years is, although there's a business model to be made off of buying leads and going through that lead process, and people can do that, the actual shining place for the true professionals is being the elite agent in the area. And this became so incredibly evident to me. I've always known that, I've always believed that, but it became incredibly real and evident. I'm sitting at this heads of state, heads of industry event, and I'm at lunch with these two guys who are CEOs of big lead generation companies that you would recognize. Millions and millions of dollars being spent to generate leads. They're selling it to agents, and their agents, they tout on their advertising. Their agents are amazing. They're rated. They're fantastic. Both of them moved in the last year, and when they were talking about them moving, neither one of them used their own system. Neither one of them used any of their own agents to help them with their purchase or with their listing. They both went to the elite agent in the area that understood the micro market, understood the context of that micro market in the bigger sense, and they went to the industry leaders of those elite agents in the area. And so even the CEOs of these massive companies aren't going to those places because, again, there's not the trust and loyalty that they have with those people that you as an elite agent can develop. So what are some of the when you're doing your approach to discussing commissions with clients, what are some of the common concerns that they have while you're justifying your value? Because, much like a listing side, a buyer side, real estate is unique in the fact that we are justifying what we get paid up front, before we do a lot of delivery, right? I mean, there's a few things that we do to kind of promise, but we're really kind of selling the promise of what we're going to do versus paying us for what we actually did. So what are some of the things that, your approach is when you're discussing those things with your clients? And again, common points where people push back, and what are the things you're doing to justify your value?
I mean, I can hop in. I've had this, I've been dealing with a recurring client. That's not a nice way of referring to them, but it's been more of an issue. And this is actually before the NAR ruling came down. And again, I was a principal broker for a long time, 15 plus years. And I've been at large and small brokerages, but during my time as a principal, and one of the ways I cultivated a, very, very strong repeat book of business with some pretty powerful clients is due to the fact that I contributed fee from time to time based on what these deals looked like. And again, we're talking about luxury real estate. So, and we sell all kinds of real estate, my team, but Deer Valley is my number one market. So I will say I'm going to own it. Luxury is my comfort zone. And a lot of these clients I dealt with early on, I knew they would be repeat clients. And I was okay not offering it up right away. But, if it came up and realizing that this was going to conceivably be a client that I would be working with well into the future, which I still am, I would offer to contribute fee and sweat equity, if you will, if it was appropriate. And if I felt like it was, again, going to build that trust and loyalty. So I've had it more on the listing side. It doesn't come up a whole lot in our market because our prices are so high that even a slight adjustment to the commission doesn't move the needle that much. And if they're really struggling with this fee conversation, then we need to talk about the bigger issue. You know, what is it that we can bring to the table to help you combat your frustration with the high fee? Can we add some additional and interesting and unique marketing? What can we do to bring something to the table to help you, you know, kind of not get stuck on the specifics of the fee, which don't necessarily move the needle that much?
Yeah, yeah, great point. Tim, I know you've got a story to share that's along these kind of lines as well.
I do, yeah. It's on the listing side, but I did want to go back to something that you had mentioned earlier, Sarah, about your typical client profile. You know, these titans of industry, these people who are sophisticated, purchasers, sellers of real estate, and you made mention of the fact that when you talk with them, you're able to deliver something that they can't do, regardless of how many attorneys they may have, regardless of how many times they've purchased or sold a home. One of the things that I always share with my clients, just especially on both the buyer and the seller side, is this notion, and this is again where I'm trying to establish value prior to having the conversation of fees, right? It's this notion of relationships within the community and my relationships with my colleagues, fellow agents, because as we all know, a lot of the deals get done based on the relationships that we have with each other within the community. We know which agents typically are going to have certain types of properties or have buyers at this price point. And it's building those relationships and building the trust with those other agents as well. That, in my opinion, is the new value contributor, one of the primary value contributors in these conversations. Because I say it all the time, especially with the buyers, there's no value in telling you what houses are on the market. In many cases, my clients know what houses are on the market sometimes before I do. They're singularly focused on their search, right? And I've got, multiple clients that I'm working with, plus a business to run and marketing to do. So it's like you sometimes know more about what's coming on the market or what's on the market than I do. But what nobody can provide that I can provide is the relationships. It's going to those agents and saying, hey, what do you have coming that may not be there? So I just wanted to make that point. As we continually evolve in this industry, it's constantly thinking about how are we delivering value in a way that is something that they can't necessarily get on their own. So that kind of goes back to, your point that you made earlier, Sarah. So the story that I wanted to share here is on that conversation about fees, specifically as it relates to the listing side. So I got a referral a few weeks ago, and to your point, Sarah, if somebody's coming to you through a referral, you hope and ideally, you're going to have an added level of credibility just by that fact. But I happen to be out of town at the time. And so I had a conversation over the phone with this referral client. And she said that, her and her husband were looking to sell their home. There was some situations that were forcing them to sell. They had just purchased the home a year and a half ago. And their number one goal was they didn't want to lose any money on the sale. And the number two goal was the husband wanted a deal on the commission. That was the actual words. We want a deal on the commission, and he only wants to pay 4%. So I said, okay. I said, look normally I like to have these initial conversations in person. I happen to be out of town. Would it be okay with you if I scheduled a meeting for us when I'm back in town next week, and the three of us can sit down and we can have a conversation about this? Absolutely, that'd be fine. So fast forward, as I'm preparing for this meeting, I was thinking, what is really going on here? And I'm going to try to put myself in the shoes of, these particular sellers. And I was prepared to go in. I mean, I didn't really know these people. And, I'm thinking, is this somebody who's going to just try to grill me for a discount on fees and stuff like that? But I was prepared, and I kind of did some thinking and thought, well, what seems to be their main objective? They just bought the house a year and a half ago. They don't want to lose any money. So with that, I assembled sort of a pretty simple, what I would call, it wasn't even a listing presentation, basically. It was just a simply, here's what I understand as your objectives. Here's my basic understanding of kind of where your situation is currently. And then I ended up running a number of different scenarios as far as what their ultimate net would be based on purchase price or selling price and fees, commission fees. And I went through the whole thing, and I spend time doing this now too. This is something that I've integrated in both on the buyer and seller side. I have that conversation about, hey, I'd just like to know how much of an understanding do you have as far as how commissions are paid in a real estate transaction? Most of the time, there's a very basic knowledge. Well, I think, doesn't the seller pay for that stuff? So then it opens the door to really begin, again, to inform them about how things work. The bottom line came down to this. The 4% wasn't really like a hard line in the sand. They were savvy enough that they knew that the biggest chunk of their cost to sell their home was going to be the real estate commissions. So they were just trying to minimize that biggest component. And when I got down to talking with them, I gave them a scenario that said, my typical fees for listing and selling a home are X. And I always break out the conversation between my fees and what a strategy would look like if you incorporated, an offer of compensation to the buyer's broker. So I give them those two distinctions. And I said, my fees, incorporated into my fees, are all of the marketing costs, the money to, create the marketing collateral, photos, videos, on and on and on. And I said, I'm willing to provide my services for a lesser typical fee, but what I would like from you is to pick up all of the marketing costs. And they were like, oh, okay. So I went through the whole thing, and the bottom line was I gave them a tremendous amount of information that gave them a pretty clear picture of what they were looking at as they were putting this house back on the market. They came back to me a week later and said, hey, we really want to do this with you. I mean, all the information was really, really helpful. The bottom line was we ended up on a commission rate that was, I did discount my commission just slightly, because once I got to know them, I realized they're not trying to just, grind me for sake of grinding me down. They were in a really difficult situation, and I felt sympathetic to that. And so it kind of goes back to your point, Sarah. Every transaction is different. Every transaction has unique factors to it. And when I'm giving training, I said, you can have your standard rates, but, making a strategic decision about, what, I am going to take a slight discount on my fees, and I will incorporate the marketing. That made their day. That gave them such relief that, it was worth it to me to, say, hey, I'm willing to do this because at the end of the day, I'm helping somebody get through a difficult situation in their life at this moment in time.
Yeah, it's so important when we have to make a business decision, right? And whenever we're going to talk about crediting something back or doing something with our clients that we deviate off of what our personal standards are. It comes down to a business decision. Does this make good long-term sense for my business? Is it something in the luxury space? Sometimes it makes a lot of sense to make that business decision and do a credit back, because if we can get not only the client to come back as a repeat client, but also to refer other clients, it pays for itself in spades, right? But I think the most important part of that for both of you is that it is a discretionary thing based on the situation. And the situation is less based on, well, partly based on your perspective about the situation, but it's also very much rooted in the client's perspective of the situation, right? If the client is hurting or if the client needs something, putting yourself in their shoes and understanding where they're coming from and having that empathy and that sympathy for where they're at, and being able to make those decisions, so that you can keep the long term in mind, is really a really important thing, versus just saying, okay, because the other side of that is when people aren't very good and they're not very professional and they don't know what they're doing, they just tend to just lead with the loss leader. And then they get stuck in this pattern of always doing the loss leader because they don't lead with value. And then, if you lead with value, you get to a point where there are times we make business decisions, and that's okay, right? I mean, that's a perfectly normal and reasonable thing with a business. As a business owner, I'm going to make a decision that may cost me on the front end, but it's also going to pay me on the back end, and I'm okay with that. And so, and luxury is great because you can get so creative, right? I mean, with that, and saying, okay, well, I'll take this in commission dollars, but I really like that Harley or that Ferrari, and so I'll take that as part of the trade. I mean, it had agents, say, well, I'll take a percentage of this, but you've got that Lambo in the garage, and I'll take the keys to the Lambo when we're done with this. And and the owner's like, all right, and just works with it, because again, sophisticated clients are willing to go outside of the box, and great agents that work with them understand that and don't get kind of hemmed into this little tiny box that we're doing that. So kind of turning our attention. Yeah,
if
go
I
ahead.
could just make one comment on this story I just told. By the way, I'm meeting with them later today to get the listing agreement signed. This is not a luxury transaction. No. In our market, I term it as sort of the executive level. So it's not a luxury transaction, but with my decision to sort of help these people, I still in my mind want to deliver to them a luxury experience. And I think that for me, that there's just a personal satisfaction for me. And a lot of what we do in this industry really does come down to, are we personally satisfied? Sarah, you mentioned, I think maybe before we got on the live stream, we do this because there's such a passion in what we do. And for me, the passion is to be able to help these people through the transition. So even though it's not a luxury transaction, and I'm going to be giving up a cut of what I would normally get on a transaction of this level, the luxury experience that I want them to have means so much more to me than a few $1,000s in marketing costs. So
I love that. I definitely want to echo that, please. Thank you very much for saying that. I think that's been a huge part of my business practice too. And I appreciate you, Chris, calling it a business. I mean, let's give ourselves a little bit of credit here, in running a more sophisticated business practice than sort of just, what people's perceptions are of what realtors do. But there is the passion element, and actually being able to contribute in a community that is luxury oriented, quite frankly. I mean, we've got all different, demographics accounted for in our region. And it is a big part of our lives to consider, all different price points and providing the same level, though, of luxury. Thank you for saying that, Tim.
Yeah, it's interesting, because if we look at luxury, people ask me a lot, how do we define luxury? And we have some loose definitions around luxury. But I have to remind people that luxury is really, it's a mindset. It's not just a price point, because depending on what market you're in and where you're at, luxury is it permeates who you are and your brand. And it's more a reflection of who you are versus who the client is, right? And so understanding that price points aside, if you're in the luxury space, you bring yourself and your character and your integrity kind of have this higher demand that becomes a luxury demand of yourself that you deliver to your clients, because it's a reflection of you, not them, as far as that goes. So that kind of takes us really kind of into an interesting turn here. What are the things that you're doing to align and to manage and then to exceed, client expectations throughout the process? Are there touch points you're putting in? What are you purposing to do to ensure that your clients are, on the same page, that you're managing their expectations in a transactional world where so much of the transaction is outside of our particular control? We're like conductors that are conducting orchestras, but we're not the ones necessarily playing all those different instruments. And, oftentimes, actually in every transaction, one of those instruments tends to have a problem, right? I mean, we don't know which one it's going to be, but we know in a transaction, something's going to happen at least once. What are you doing to manage that? And also, what are you doing to manage the expectations and then exceed the expectations of the clients with that? So, Sarah, and
Yeah,
start
I
with
would
you on that one.
love to speak to that. I mean, I had a pivotal moment in my career. I want to say it was about 10 years ago, and this is when I was a principal at a hotel in Deer Valley. And I had a client kind of pop up, and he wasn't a big time client at the time, interestingly enough. He's a pretty powerful fellow, but he was a kind of on the periphery of my business practice. And he was in town, and he had an interest in something that ended up being a big ticket. And I learned a really big lesson. It was like a Saturday afternoon or something. And I was working and working sort of 24/7 like we do. And I was always responsive, you guys. I'm on the ball. I'm a focused professional, all this kind of stuff. I came from the business world, but I did have a tendency to push things off a little bit, even a half an hour, just I'll get to it kind of thing. But with this particular case, for some odd reason, I decided to go a different direction, and I picked up the phone, and we had a spontaneous conversation about something that ended up being, like I said, very big ticket. And it changed the entire trajectory of my profession because of what he bought. And it was a series of domino effects. And then it really kind of propelled me into the luxury sphere. But it was a big wake up call, because I always thought, I mean, I worked for Goldman Sachs. I did acquisitions. It was very intense. I cut my teeth on some pretty hardcore stuff in the early days after I got my MBA. But I did need to get my tools sharpened as far as my level of responsiveness, and I've never gone back since. I'm pretty intense. I don't have a lot of downtime. I mean, my phone is glued to my hip. You guys know what it's like. This is, if you really want it and you want success in the luxury sphere, this is what it looks like. And so I am all about the responsiveness. I'm hyper responsive. And then last, I don't want to take too much time because I'm interested to hear what you have to say, Tim. I also have learned not to make mistakes. And, that's tough because we're human, right? But there's no room for mistakes in this business. And so I end up spending far too much time on contracts and things when, perhaps I could be doing some other things, because I'm so intensely focused on not making mistakes. Our clients don't have time for that.
Yeah. I mean, I echo that 100%, Sarah. I mentioned earlier on that, we had at our weekly broker tour meeting a few months ago. Our leader of that meeting was at our California Association of Realtors symposium that they had. And there was a risk management lawyer there. And he said, one of the biggest risks in our industry is that agents don't read the contracts. They don't understand the purchase agreement. And I'm like, this is the central document that we use. How do you not know this stuff? And so, to your point, Sarah, I pore over that contract. I read it multiple times. I'll go back, maybe every quarter, I'll make sure that I go back and read it again, because that is the document that describes everything and it governs everything. And I always make sure that it's, T's are crossed, I's are dotted, so that, because it helps everybody. It's a benefit. I just submitted an offer the other day for my clients, and the agent, came back and said, me and my client just want to thank you on such a clean offer that you sent over to us. You know what? It makes the process move more smoothly. So I totally appreciate that you do that as well, because that's what I do. I found, and I'm sure, Sarah, your experience was the same in Goldman Sachs. When I was at PwC, the goal was to always make sure I never received a call from my client asking me what's going on. That if I got a call from my client that said, "Hey, what's happening? I haven't heard from you. Where are we with something?" Then I felt like I failed. And so I have just carried that mentality and that approach into this industry, because I'm a firm believer, especially in real estate, right? In the absence of information, um, you know, uncertainty begins to fester. And when there's uncertainty, there's anxiety. And when there's anxiety, there's fear. And when there's fear, there's frustration and anger. And I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. So, my number one goal is to constantly be talking with my clients. And I tell them right up front, I said, I'm not going to over communicate with you, but I make it a point that at least once, if not twice a week, I am reaching out to my clients, even if to say, sorry, there's no new information, or we haven't received any inquiries in the property this week, or something like that, because I don't want them to start creating their own, reality. And what I have found, and again, you kind of hear these things after the fact. I just naturally want to do that. But what I have found, and why I continue to believe that that's a simple thing to do, is because I've heard numerous clients of mine after the fact say, the fact that you kept us informed through the whole process, before, during, and after, just made it so easy for us. It made it, we didn't have any stress throughout this process. So, that is the one core thing that I do, because it makes everything else easier. If the client isn't anxious, if they're not frustrated or angry, when you have to have some unfortunate or some difficult conversations with them, it's easier to do it that way. Again, not rocket science here, but just
Yeah.
Exactly.
It is interesting because before we started the live stream, we were chatting a little bit about the sheer amount of marginal and incompetent agents in the industry, right? And when there is such a bulk of marginal and incompetent agents, it doesn't take much to be extraordinary, right? I mean, like, just call people back, right? Or just read the contract, understand this thing that you're asking people to sign, right? I mean, the bar is not really high. I mean, it's a pretty low bar. It's not like we're trading on Wall Street and like having to, deal with other sharks. It's a low bar. Read the contract, talk to your people, right? I mean, like, I know I'm oversimplifying that, but one of the things that I think is really good in some of the shakeup of our industry and kind of what we're going through currently in the U.S. space is, we have a lot of outside influences looking at us and calling us to account for what the mean has been, right? What the average has been. And it gives us an opportunity to showcase above average and showcase what should be expected from above average. And all of the ethics that go along with that. But we still do kind of work in this swampy place. And so there's places that you both know agents that are great agents, fantastic agents that I always use the mom test, right? When I was looking at agents, would I give this agent a referral to my mom in her transaction, right? I mean, it was the mom test. I've been doing it, for years and years and years, because if I thought enough of them to let them trust them with my mom, then they're good agents. Otherwise, if they failed the mom test, not so much, right? But when it comes down to it, how do what are some of the things that you're doing, and how do you deal with some of the unethical component of the business or the incompetent component of the business? I know, some people take an attitude of, they're like sharks with minnows. And if you're going to be incompetent in my pool, I'm going to eat you, and some people are a little bit more helpful with that, or some people are just more disdaining. What are your attitudes when it comes to kind of the marginal and incompetent agents and some of the lack of ethics that you see from, I'm going to say I was going to say from time to time, but I think it's probably more than from time to time within the, from the cohorts. It's funny because ethics, we usually talk about clients and us in ethics, but really that's fundamentally not usually the problem. Maybe a couple times over the course of our business in 20 years, we run into an ethical issue with our client, but we have to deal with it with other agents all the time, right? How do you guys handle that, and how do you do that without drinking too much?
It's so true. And actually, Tim, I do want to go back to what you said earlier in regards to, bringing value to the table and our colleague relationships. And, I wish that I did learn this long ago. So I wasn't going to say, but this is such a critical part of what we do, the work with our colleagues. And
Right.
it is very frustrating. And I've been in lots of scenarios because I was small and large brokerage. And so, as an independent person holding on for a long time, not, wanting to prove myself for some strange reason to the real estate community as an independent broker, which was tough to do. I came into contact, and this was in Deer Valley as it was growing in its luxury, world, very competitive. I'm so naive, in fact, still to this day. I can't believe it's, that people will cut corners to undercut our colleagues. It just makes no sense. It's a shortcut, maybe sometimes that people can take. But it won't end up producing in the long run because it is a small community. I'm sure that or whether it's a large market, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, those kinds of cutting corners are going to come back to haunt people. And I have been pushed to the brink a couple of times with some behavior from colleagues that was hard for me to stomach. But what I decided to do was dig deep and choose the high road. And I lost a couple of clients. I have lost clients absolutely over the years in letting go of my ego, quite frankly, and allowing people to, fall on their own sword, or, whatever that expression is. So it's a tough road, but after all of these years, going back again to what you said, Tim, a big value add is our relationships with our colleagues. If we don't know what's going on off market, I mean, the MLS is one thing, but this is such a tight market. I'm sure a lot of yours are as well. You have to be creative. There has to be other ways to find inventory. You got to talk to your coworkers. You got to like them, get along, share, help each other raise the bar. Because what, another colleague's good performance will, mirror back on us, and it ends up elevating the entire community as a result.
Right. Exactly. In fact, this transaction that we just got into today, the offer, my clients accepted the seller's counter offer. This was all cultivated by my relationship with another agent. And this is an off-market deal because my clients knew something that they wanted very specifically. And I knew that this client or this other agent had a potential listing coming up. And it's just because of that trust, because of that relationship and respect that I have with her, we now have an off-market deal for my clients, which is fantastic. But going back to your question, Chris, about ethical behavior and how do I manage through that? For me, it's all about documentation. I document everything. I make sure that I have email communications. I make sure that there's no question whatsoever about, a term in a contract or what the performance is expected to be, so on and so forth. And it is challenging because when you run across other agents on the other side of a transaction who maybe aren't quite as diligent, perhaps, who maybe don't really understand the nuances of the technical aspects of the contract. Let me just step aside. So part of my technical skills when I was in consulting was project management. So that all started back in my first career where I was in aerospace as an aerospace engineer, managing, the build of airplanes. So this whole notion of project management, and effectively, once you get into transaction, you're in a project management environment. So this notion of managing a transaction like a project, I always have a little project schedule that I make for each transaction, and who's doing what. So it's holding people accountable to that, and it's so surprising sometimes when contingency dates are due. Things need to be released, or certain performances need to be done, and your counterpart on the other side is like, oh yeah, well, Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. What do you mean you'll get to it? It's due today, right? Here's the contract. Here's the legal document. So what is frustrating sometimes is when you have and I don't want to necessarily refer to as unethical behavior, but certainly a lack of um, focus on the discipline of what we have to do once we are in a transaction. But to combat any potential unethical behaviors, I document everything. So because if
Yeah,
you
it's
have to ever come back to a situation and sort of demonstrate, you know, I've got that paper trail, I've got that
yeah,
documentation to support that. And
yeah, it's interesting.
whether it's an agent that I've worked with numerous times or an agent that I'm working with for the first time, the process is the same.
Yeah, which says more about you than it does about the other agent. I think that when it comes down to it, people really underestimate the value of your personal reputation in this space, right? Because not only for ourselves, I think we underestimate it, but I think that we underestimate it as far as the value to the client. I've seen great agents get hundreds of thousands of dollars, get their offers accepted for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than a not great agent when there are multiple offers on the table. Because the value of the reputation of the agent that was great, they knew that they were going to close. They knew that they were going to not have any issues. They knew what that was going to happen, and they that value was literally hundreds of thousands of dollars difference from an agent that was coming in that wasn't well known in that particular market, that didn't have the greatest reputation in that particular market. And the seller and the listing agent went with this offer that was substantially lower in price, hundreds of thousands of dollars lower. And that's not the, I mean, there's lots and lots of examples of where reputation really matters. And it becomes an advantageous part of what we offer from a value proposition to our buyers and sellers, because our reputation works for us even when we're not working, because we built that over a period of time.
Yeah. And
Um,
I want to just make a comment on that, Chris. And this is one thing that I see, more often than I would care to see it, is, it's also the responsibility of us to manage our own clients. So when you're talking in the context of, another, an offer will be accepted based on, my reputation, knowing that I'm going to make it a smooth transaction for the other party. That's part of that means we have a responsibility too to manage our own clients and to manage our clients' expectations and frankly, to some degree, manage their behavior. I've had instances where I'm on one side of the transaction and it's very clear that the other agent has no management control over their client. And you know it when you see it, you're getting an email from the agent and all they're basically doing is copying and pasting some rant that they received from their client and they're throwing it over the fence to you to deal with, right? So I think it's really imperative that, we have a responsibility because at the end of the day, it's ultimately in the best interest of our clients to help manage them as well and keep them from, spinning out of control or, whatever, just in the sake of kind of moving smoothly through the process to the end goal. So I just wanted to make that
yeah,
comment.
always have their long-term best interest in mind, and that sometimes means helping them stay a little bit more constrained and managing them so that they don't hurt themselves in the long term by something that they want to do in the short term.
Right.
Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I'm just thinking that, I mean, it really is all about recognizing our value and I just think that's the bottom line. We're going to come back to that each time. And I think a client will appreciate that we get to the core of what it is we bring to the table, because at the end of the day, we really are providing a service. I mean, we are in the service business. So, we've got to really get to the crux of cultivating what our strengths are and, be able to focus on those.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look back on let's say the last, well, we'll go back 8 years because that's Tim's lifespan in this particular business. What is something that you know now that you would tell yourself 8 years ago, that you would do differently if you could go back in time and kind of rewrite it, knowing what you know now?
Yes, that's a great question. I think the number one thing is that I would tell myself, my early 8 year ago self, is build your business the way you want to build your business, and not just do what everybody else is doing. I came into this industry, with an understanding and with a knowledge of how to work with clients, how to engage clients. I looked around me, this goes specifically to the buyer representation agreements. And I asked the question and I said, well, why don't we use these? Well, nobody does that. And it's like, well, okay, I'm not here to rock the boat. I'm new in this industry, so I'll just kind of go along. And it only took one time, and thankfully it was early on in my career, to be burned by not having an agreement in place. And I said, you know what, this is nonsense. I don't work at risk. I don't work for free, and so I'm not going to do that. So once that mindset shifted, that I can create this business however I want to, that was really a sort of a watershed moment for me. And thankfully it happened early on versus later in my career. So that's what I would tell myself. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Do what makes sense for you and build your business from that perspective.
Yeah. How about you, Sarah?
I
Something
like that.
wish you could tell yourself, a decade ago.
I know. I wish we could rewind it a bit. We would all learn so much. But I think for me, it was an issue of just being a little too, for lack of a better word, I'm going to call it soft. Be less apologetic. And that is really to understand and recognize your value. And I think it goes beyond the real estate business and has more to do with how we sort of figure out what our place is really in our community and in the world, quite frankly, is really to get centered with that earlier and go from there, go from a little more of a position of power. I mean, this is big business. This is high stakes. We have to take it very seriously. And, it's competitive. We've got to, be as sharp as possible and really use all the tools available to us as an individual. And I think I did my best, but I do feel I left a few things on the table. I'm learning it now. And I'm very grateful to be able to be contributing and participating on this level with all of you, because this is an exciting business. It can be very rewarding, but it's also pretty stressful. And, we got to take it seriously. And I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I'm definitely learning how to just embrace my value proposition at this point in my career now and go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great insight. Yeah, fantastic. So, with both of you, if people that are watching this and participating in this, if they've got a referral going into your area, what's the best way for them to contact you, to send them? Because honestly, if you got somebody that's going into wine country in California, Tim is your guy. If you got anybody in the Park City regional area, Sarah's your gal. Like, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Please, we call ourselves Dream Team Park City, and we are a dream to work with. There's two other gals on my team. One of them is also a broker, and we each bring something kind of different to the table. So Dream Team Park City, that's us. Please feel free to call me, reach out with regards to anything you may have in this area. Be delighted to connect.
Awesome. Tim, how about you?
I don't have a cool name like that, Sarah. Sorry. Simply me, just Tim. You can reach out to me through my website, which is newly redesigned. I'm very proud of it. timdebellisrealtor.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. It's all Tim DeBellis. So it's pretty simple. Yeah.
Well, thank you both, because I know that we could spend all day literally just talking about all things real estate. I mean, we kind of pigeonholed ourselves into, a certain topic for today, but literally, what both of you are doing in all these different areas of real estate is just fascinating. It's interesting, and it's leading what's going on in the real estate industry as we're kind of evolving and going into real estate 3.0, or this era in the US at least, of a new era of real estate, which I think is going to be really, really good for the professionals. I'm gonna go, I've been planting my flag on this for a long time, but I think that all these changes move towards professionalism and rewarding those that really know what they're doing. And I think that the people that know what what they're doing are going to have more business. They're going to make more money, and it's going to be absolutely incredible. And I think that they're going to be rewarded because they're giving a much better experience and higher level of service to their clientele. I think the clients are going to be happier when they're represented by real professionals than when they're represented by the kind of the mediocre mean. And I can't wait for our industry to go through that change so that the true pros, can shine and can get to the other side. So thank you both for your time today. Thank you both